All right, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for our 2025 Action Team training call. We are so excited to have you all here. I think most of you know how to use Zoom at this point, but just as a reminder, if you have any questions, you can click at the chat bubble at the bottom of your screen, and that's going to open a side panel. So if you have any questions, feel free to add them to chat at any time. There's also a feature in your chat bar where you can raise your hand. If you want to talk live on the call, we will call on you. And I am going to ask Jeff to advance our slides so we can see the instructions here. You will notice that some of us who are hosting the call, next to our name in parentheses, you can see the city we're from. We are all about connecting the action team to other people in your area or knowing where everyone is doing this work around the country. So if you open the participants panel and you hover over your name, you will see 3 little dots, and there's an option in there to select more and then select rename. And when you select rename, you can change your name. So it probably says your first name right now, and we're inviting everyone to put your name and then also the city and your state you're from. So you can see if anyone else is from your area or where all the action teams are around the country. So take a minute to do that so we can see where everyone's from. We've got myself, I'm in Washington, D.C. We've got Sandy, one of our special guests. She is in Jacksonville, Florida. Is that right, Sandy?
It's Jacksonville Beach, actually.
Jacksonville Beach. That sounds very Florida. Lovely. We've got Elizabeth in Los Angeles. We've got Arlen, Salt Lake City, Kenny in New Orleans, April in Chicago, Jeff in Houston. I think I've got our full speaker panel. So take a minute, let us know where you're from. Feel free to put it in the chat too. And while you take time to do that, I'm going to turn it over to Kenny Lamberti. I think a lot of you already know Kenny. He is Best Friends' Director of Grassroots Advocacy, and he's going to kick us off tonight.
Hey, everyone. As always, first, I want to acknowledge appreciate everyone for being here. I know that we are all still dealing with a lot in the world these days. There is still a pandemic that's affecting us all differently, both health-wise, families, financially. There's a lot going on as it relates to race and gender equity in this country. And we're all going through a lot, feeling a lot of anxiety, maybe even grief or loss and stress. And we really, as always, we want to make this call a place where we both try to give tools of how to do something about the world and make it a better place, but also to have a place where maybe we can smile and laugh a little bit and embrace positivity and a kind of united family of kind, good-hearted, action-oriented people. So thank you for being here. First, quickly, you guys most already know this, but that 2025 Action Team, which if you don't know, is 13,000 strong, represented, I believe, in all 50 states at this point. And it's growing day by day, week by week, something we're incredibly excited about. And again, just a quick overview, a community-driven effort. This is your action team. We wanted to create the tools and the resources and the abilities and the connection points to help you find each other, to help you find ways and resources and abilities to connect and initiate change and life-saving positive things for good in your local community. This is your action team. We just want to create the tools and resources. Tonight, what we're going to really dive into and focus on is how legislation, ordinances, and political engagement in your local community can create incredible positive change and life-saving force for cats and dogs. It's not always the sexiest part, although make it sexy and fun, but it's incredibly important. Without engaging our local stakeholders, legislators, city commissioners, municipal organizations, it creates a pathway to help community cats, to make sure that dogs of different breeds aren't discriminated against, to put an end to puppy mills and things like that. In order to do that, we need you. We need the action team. And this is an incredible way to get involved. This is a way to get involved that maybe you can't walk dogs, maybe you can't trap cats, maybe you can't pound the streets and be a community organizer, but you can work, you can make phone calls, you can email people, you can get petitions, you can use your influence, use your friends and your network and family of people to create change for policy and legislation. So that's what we're going to dive in on tonight. Want to get you excited about it. We have some of the best and smartest leading people in the country who work in this space around for animals. We're super grateful that they're here tonight. And we're going to start by handing it over to Sandy Golding, one of my amazing colleagues, who's our National Volunteer Specialist for Best Friends. She's in Jacksonville, and she's also a Jacksonville Beach City Council Commissioner. And so she's actually actively involved in all these things we talked about. So I'm gonna keep my trap shut for a little bit, or maybe for a little longer than a little bit, and turn it over to Sandy. It's all yours.
Thank you, Kenny. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I know what it's like to be in your shoes, because when I first got involved in my community, I didn't know anything about my local government. And I went to my city council meetings for many years, and I worked to get a dog park built in my community, advocated for improved animal ordinances, and I worked to get some pet retail sales bans passed in 3 communities. And ultimately, after many years of participating in my local government, I decided in 2018 to run for office, and I've been serving on the Jacksonville Beach City Council for the last year and a half. Seems like 3.5 years. But in my experience on both sides as an advocate and elected officials are more inclined to work with you when you've established a positive relationship with them and they understand the need for the legislation that you would like for them to pass. So Jeff, if you'll go ahead and go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about meeting your legislators and what you need to do before you meet your legislators. So first of all, you need to find out who your elected officials are. You can usually find this out by going to your city's website. And also check to see, do you have a district representative? This is going to be someone who you voted for, who represents you, and they represent the area of the city you live in. And then find out which ones have pets, because your goal should be to identify the elected officials who will sponsor your legislation. And then attend or watch government meetings to acquaint yourself with the process that the legislation goes through. Nowadays with COVID, most of the meetings are going to be held online or virtually, but it's still a great way to familiarize yourself with the elected officials and learn more about their governing style and their positions on issues. And then put together information for them that's basically a case for support. Do your research so you can provide them with data and facts in support for the legislation. And you need to establish yourself as someone who's knowledgeable, not just passionate, but knowledgeable about the legislation. And then provide them legislation that's been passed by other cities, especially cities in your state or in neighboring cities, because this will give them a great starting point to draft legislation for your city. And then identify any points that might be raised by opposition and formulate responses to that opposition. Think about any questions that may come up and be able to answer those questions as well. Ultimately, the information that you're going to provide these elected officials should give them every reason to say yes and no reason to say no to your request to support your legislation. So next slide, Jeff. Now, when you have your case for the legislation prepared, the next thing you're going to want to do is contact your elected officials by email or phone to schedule a face-to-face or a virtual meeting. That's really the best way to get things done is really by working with them personally, not via email, not via phone if you can. It's always better to do face-to-face or a virtual meeting. And don't be afraid to reach out to them. They were elected to represent you, and they need to hear from you about the issues that are important to you. When you meet with them, be sure to be positive, respectful, and reasonable, because the first impression you make will definitely influence your relationship with them and their interest in working with you going forward. Be sure to provide them an information packet and contact information for you as well. And before the meeting is over, ask them to sponsor and or support the legislation. They're the ones who know best how to get the legislation passed, and you need to ask them to suggest next steps and give you insight into the other elected officials that you'll be meeting with as well. Next slide. Last but not least, participation, persistence, and patience is so important in the legislative process. You need to stay involved and don't give up. Legislation takes time to get through the process. And once you've educated the elected officials on the need for your legislation, they really need to know that there's community support, because community support will be key to getting the legislation passed. So to talk more about building community support, I want to introduce you to my colleague, Elizabeth Orrick, who's the National Manager of Puppy Mill Initiatives.
Thank you, Sandy. Hi, everybody. This is such a treat for me. I love talking about this issue. I have been in animal welfare for a very long time. I've been with Best Friends for almost 13 years. And throughout that time, I've worked on hundreds of legislative efforts that involved engaging with elected officials at all levels of government. And I believe that we, as advocates, all of you, have the most power at the local level. So I'm really happy that we are here talking about how to affect change within the community. So when you have an issue that you're trying to put forth in your community, something that requires the action of your local officials, there's no need to go at it alone. Bring the community in to support you so that your efforts can be stronger and more effective. And there's different ways to build community support, but mostly it's through word of mouth and word of fingers, keyboards, phones, pens. We all know that social media is a powerful tool. It can be a great way to quickly generate awareness and support for your issue, whether you use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Nextdoor, or if you have a blog. Jeff, can you go to the next slide? Now, one thing I recommend is to create a community Facebook group or a page around whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, because that's a really easy and effective way to share updates, provide contact information for local officials, or post a sample letter for supporters to send to those officials, or to link to a petition. Now, if you guys check out the action team map, you can see if there's already a Facebook group in your area that you can use. And if not, then you can create one and then add it to that map. Now, I mentioned petitions. Jeff, if you can go forward, please. Petitions can be a really good tool to generate support from the community. And can you go back? You should be on the, there we go. And from my experience, paper petitions are the most effective and provide an opportunity to engage with people directly. But given the pandemic, online petitions might be more viable for the time being. But either way, make sure that you get signatures only from residents of the community. Signatures from all over the world does not impress elected officials. In fact, it can sometimes backfire because they really only want to hear from their constituents. And that's one of the dangers of online petitions. So just be aware of that. I have put a few free sites on here, but again, when it's safe to return to gathering signatures in person, I'd suggest you go back to that. Okay, you can go forward, Jeff. And this is really important. When you're building out your community support, reach out to all walks of life when you're trying to affect change. Now, obviously, the animal welfare community is important. Veterinarians, shelter workers, groomers, adoption pet store owners, animal control officers, all of those folks. But don't just focus on the animal welfare community. Think about other respected professionals in that community. Think about business owners, doctors, community clubs, neighborhood councils, local Girl Scout chapters, the Chamber of Commerce, teachers, students, kids. Students are very motivated. Kids are irresistible, and they have a lot of energy and they're adorable. So they're always a good resource for you. And think diversity, be inclusive. People from all ages, socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnicities, religious affiliations, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because the more broad your support, the more credible your coalition is going to be to the officials that you're trying to influence, and the less animal rightsy that you're going to appear. The reality is not every legislator, like Sandy, is going to care about animals. And even if they do, their job is to represent their constituents, to be fiscally responsible and to do what's best for the community as a whole. So think about that and remember to frame your message to appeal to their interests as much as you can and avoid being typecast as the, crazy animal people, which we all are. Now, once you've built out that support, you can ask those individuals to contact those local officials, sign letters of support, attend public meetings, and speak in support of your issue. And you're going to get more response if you make it easy for them by providing them with a sample letter or a few talking points, which you can provide in your Facebook group. Now, a lot of elected officials have public Facebook pages, websites, and Twitter accounts, so take advantage of that opportunity to communicate directly with them through those channels and then ask others to do the same. Jeff, can you go to the next slide? Great. And then get the word out in other ways. Write editorials, comment on blogs, contact the local newspaper or TV station. They love these kinds of stories. They love human interest stories. Ironically, animal stories are considered human interest stories. And reporters particularly love it when those stories are brought to them. And elected officials tend to respond a little more quickly when these issues get covered by the public, by the media. It's how we were able to get a puppy mill ordinance in Los Angeles County years ago, is because the issue had been spotlighted in the news, and that made those legislators respond a little bit more quickly. Next slide, please. And as Sandy said, attend local government meetings. These meetings are public and anyone can attend them. When there isn't a pandemic, you can attend them in person, but you can still attend them online or watch archive meetings on the website. And I really, really recommend that. As Sandy said, it's a great way to connect with your community and to see your local government in action, to see what kinds of issues they've taken up, how they voted on those issues. You can see who's animal friendly and who isn't. That's gonna all be very, very helpful information for you. And not only can anyone attend these meetings, anyone can speak at them, and you're going to want to do that. You're going to need to do that. Now, the new normal is that this is all happening virtually right now, including public comment and testimony at meetings, which is great for people who tend to get nervous about public speaking, particularly in front of public officials. But the more you do it, the easier it gets. So this is a great time to get some of that experience because it's much less stressful if you're on the phone instead of standing at a microphone in front of the whole group in their big chairs. Next slide. But even on the phone, you still want to present yourself as a credible, compelling speaker. So I really recommend that you take a good look at our toolkit. We have an amazing toolkit on how to affect change and enact ordinances in your community. And I recommend that you really pay attention to the guidelines for public speaking. We have some really good tips, some good do's and don'ts that will help you to be as effective as possible when you're communicating your message to your elected officials, whether it's at a public meeting or having that one-on-one meeting that Sandy recommended when we're able to do that again safely. So I hope that's helpful. I hope you all decide to get involved at that level because it can be really rewarding, incredibly exciting and empowering. And it's how all of us can make progress for animals and for people in our communities. So thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me bend your ear for a few minutes. And I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed and awesome colleague, Arlen Bradshaw, who is Best Friends Regional Director of the Mountain West region and a Salt Lake County Council member.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, very much. I appreciate that introduction. It was maybe a little generous. I have been asked to speak to the group this evening about budgeting. So before you log off or go to sleep, let me explain. Much of what Sandy and Elizabeth have shared is really focused on what we normally do, which is policy changes that help save the lives of animals. But budgets are policy documents, and budgets are very important, and impact so much of what happens within animal shelters. And the current climate around COVID and the economic downturn is having a pretty negative impact on budgets. So we just want to take a little bit of time to talk through that and hopefully give you some tips on how to ensure that your community knows that funding animal sheltering is important to you. So Jeff, go ahead and move the slide forward. So I'm going to talk really quickly just about different types of funding. And, you know, this is really high level stuff that hopefully you'll find interesting. And the thing about the United States is we do things so differently, state to state, community to community. So what I share with you here may directly apply to your community, or you might have a little bit different situation. So it's really important that if you want to follow those advocacy tips that Sandy and Elizabeth shared, you need to figure out what your local community looks like in terms of how the current situation with COVID might negatively be impacting local funding as it relates to animal services. So local governments are funded in a number of different ways. Property tax is common in most states and actually tends to be the most stable. There's usually a mechanism that even if valuations fall, the revenue stabilizes itself. So property tax, if you have a local government that's super reliant on property tax, it may not be as dire right now, but most local governments have a mix of revenues that affect how they fund their operations. And sales tax is really the next most common for local governments, and sales tax is incredibly volatile. I'm sure most of you right now, or at least me, I am pleasantly surprised that I have been saving money the last few months because I haven't been going out to eat as often and I haven't been shopping and I've been staying at home. And while that's good for my personal budget, it's not very good for the local government budgets around the country because they're not getting that sales tax that they would normally get for their operations. So that's where we're seeing some negative impact on budgets. Another way that particularly animal services is funded is oftentimes through fees, whether they're redemption fees, surrender fees, fees they might charge for adoption, or even licensing fees. Those help fund the operations of animal services. But as most of you are probably aware, sheltering has looked very different the last few months compared to what it has looked like that we've become used to over the last, couple decades. Intake is very down. Most shelters, especially government shelters, haven't been able to have their lobbies open to their regular services. And so fees have also been really negatively impacted. And some governments even have animal services totally reliant on those fees. And so it's really a dire situation for some shelters that are fee reliant. And then finally, of course, though, even government shelters can get grants. They can ask for private donations to help supplement what they might get out of tax dollars and fees. But grants and private donations are also being negatively impacted during this time of COVID. And so, not to paint an entirely dire picture of where we're at, but local governments across the country are having to modify their budgets to fit the revenue that they're experiencing. And oftentimes, I will say, the animal services is sometimes looked at as one area that, maybe isn't a top priority, and maybe you can shave more money off there. And what we're hoping we can do is ensure that our animal services agencies are not disproportionately affected during this really difficult budgetary time for local governments. Jeff, move us forward. So what we want you to do is use the suggestions from Sandy and Elizabeth and engage with your own decision makers for your local shelter. So depending on where you're at in the country, in most places, it's municipalities, it's cities and towns that are responsible for animal control. But oftentimes that can be in partnership with another city or town. It could be in partnership with the county that you live in. In some places, counties are in charge. or there might even be a special service district board that is responsible for your shelter. So I'm going to give you a clue here in a minute on how to maybe figure out, if you're not already aware, of who's responsible for your shelter. But there's a couple nuances too that I want you to be aware of. Animal sheltering and animal control are separate for a number of agencies across the country. I tend to lump animal services together, whether it's animal care and control or your animal care centers. But the reality is you could have a shelter that is funded separately from animal control. And that most often is the case if your municipality hires a private shelter for sheltering, and then they retain the animal control function. Similar, or oftentimes too, you could have an animal shelter that might be part of a county or a special district, but each individual city still does their own animal control. And I bring that up because, you know, a lot of the work we do is with the shelter specifically in terms of standards of care and how they engage in positive outcomes for the animals that come into their care. But animal control is also a really important part of that. And we encourage return in the field and community cat programming that oftentimes includes animal control. So especially if you have a progressive animal control department, you don't want them to be negatively impacted either. But that's a whole other policy discussion of how to encourage animal control to be progressive. But it's important that once you figure out who you're going to engage and how to engage them, just ask the questions. You know, what is happening with the budget for our local shelter? How is the shelter and animal control funded? Are they separate? Is it the same entity or different? And that's just a good thing to know generally, especially if we are advancing other policy issues outside of the budget. And then just quickly, a lot of shelters are just public municipal shelters owned by the government, but many municipalities contract with the private shelters. But that is still government funding. And while in the short term, their funding may be stabilized through a contract, it could still be negatively impacted in future funding years, or depending on how the contract is written. We still want to encourage local governments to ensure that the private shelters, if they are contract shelters, have the resources they need. So next slide, Jeff. So as Sandy mentioned, you know, finding the contact information for these people, it's all publicly available. It's usually on websites. Because we're on a Zoom call, I'm going to assume you all have internet access to find those things, and you can really just Google your town or your county, or even go to the website of a private shelter. Usually the board of directors is listed there if that's the entity you feel is most appropriately to engage with. So just a quick plug for the Best Friends Life-Saving Dashboard. It's a project we've been working on for a couple of years. Across the country, we've been trying to identify all animal shelters across the country. But you can use this for a variety of reasons. You know, we plug it to determine save rates and to figure out what shelters might need additional support to save lives. But the cool thing about it is you can drill into your local community and see all of the animal shelters in your area, and you can identify, it'll tell you this is your municipal shelter, or this is a private shelter that has a municipal contract for your community. So if you're not already aware of who's responsible, that's just one tool to help you figure that out. And so really the call to action that we want to leave you with is to take all of this information on how to engage with local policymakers and share with them that during these difficult budget periods, we're hopeful that they will make animal sheltering a priority. And we just do that by sharing with them, why is animal services important to you as an individual? You know, why do you care that your local government appropriately funds this agency? And, you know, the sad reality is there's going to be a lot of cuts to different agencies in all of our cities. But what we don't want to see happen is that animal services takes a disproportionate cut. And you know, long term, hopefully we can increase this necessary funding to save lives and have additional services for the pet lovers and pet owners in our communities. So that's what I've got just in terms of budgeting and how to engage. And I think we're going to kick it back to Kenny now to see what questions you might have.
Yep, thanks. That was awesome. All of you, Arlen, Sandy, Elizabeth, thank you so much. It's really, really amazing to have all this expertise here on the line. I'm actually going to let Elise is a much better moderator than me. So Elise, if you want to moderate the questions and kind of kick them to who you think would be most appropriate, that'd be great. Because I'll miss them. You know, I can't read the chat and talk at the same time.
I'm talking and I'm on mute. I'm happy to jump in and find questions in the chat. And I want to tell everyone who's on the call, don't be shy about opening up your chat, posting questions, raise your hand if you want to talk live. I'm going to put Jim, one of our awesome action team members, on the spot in a second, so get ready, Jim. But first I want Kenny, maybe Kenny you can speak to, and I think Elizabeth could probably jump on this too. We've got a bunch of people in the chat who are, you know, they're rescuers, they're already awesome animal advocates in that they're directly helping animals, but they're new to talking to their elected decision makers. They've never done this before. They might feel intimidated. Kenny, can you speak to, like, do people have to be an expert? Do they have to have all the answers? Do they have to, like, have deep pockets and give a lot of money to political campaigns? Like, tell us how you could be an influential advocate as a voter.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think it's something I've learned over the years. It's almost better if you're not one of those things. The best thing you can be is passionate and live in the local area, zip code, or jurisdiction, however you count, however your city is kind of structured, and just reach out and be passionate and be informed. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to know the ordinance numbers. I don't even know that. It's hard to keep up with, but I can give a quick, simple, the way I do it, and then maybe Elizabeth or someone else can add. One of the things I do, I live in New Orleans, and there's some legislation here that isn't that great for animals. And I simply just called and I emailed, and then I called and left a message. I said, hey, my name is Kenny Lamberti. I live in Orleans Parish. I love cats and dogs. I'm a registered voter. And it's really, really important to me that the people and the pets in my community are top of mind for people who are making decisions in my community. I plan on being at the polls. I plan on using my power and my vote. So I hope that you care about animals. I said, thanks a lot. And I left my number. Simple. I didn't have any other expertise, just that. And I think that that's what's important. You're in their jurisdiction, that you plan to vote, that you love animals, and you want them to care too. That's really the biggest takeaway I can give you. And I'll kind of stop there and see if maybe Elizabeth or Arlen or someone else wants to add. Excuse me.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Kenny. And it was one of the things that I was most surprised by when I started getting into this work is how accessible those elected officials are, because ultimately they work for you. You elect them, you pay their salaries through your taxes, you keep them in office or you vote them out of office, and they can be generally very responsive, even at the state level. You can just walk in, well, now, again, we're in a weird time right now, but normally you can just walk in and, you know, have meetings even without appointments. At the local level, it's even more accessible. And so I think that absolutely being a constituent helps. Saying that you're a voter also helps, because it's always top of mind getting reelected. And just using that time wisely. Don't waste anyone's time. Nobody wants their time wasted. So go in, you know, state your purpose, leave your information, be respectful of their time, be reasonable, don't be kooky. Really make it a meeting that
Don't be kooky.
That's
You
gonna
can bring
be
cookies if you
gotta tell the animal people that, right? We can all be a little kooky sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I said I referenced crazy animal people, and I say that with love because we all are crazy animal people. However, you don't come in wearing your kitten backpack and your puppy hat and all of that. Come in there as a constituent. Come in there as a member of society, of that community, and have that time be effective and and a good use of both of your times. And I said this in the chat too, that, you know, it may be that you can't get a meeting with that legislator for whatever reason. Maybe they're traveling, maybe they're working on something else, maybe they're busy. Ask to meet with one of their staff. Those staff are on their way up to becoming elected officials 99% of the time. And it's good to know them regardless. And it's also, they're the conduit to that legislator. And so don't discredit the importance of the staff. They are just as valuable a meeting as the elected official meeting. So if you can't get a meeting with that elected official, ask for their liaison. Most of them have a liaison on animal issues, or, you know, some other comparable position, and just have that time and then follow up the same as you would with an elected official.
Yeah, I'll say one quick thing to add. This is a great use of the action team. If you are part of the action team, a great lead-in is to say, I'm part of this action team that's advocating for animals in your community. Like, because then it feels a little bit bigger, and it's true. So everyone who's on this call, you're part of the action team. Even if there's two of you, it's an action team, right? You don't have to give them the list. You can just say, hey, I'm part of this action team, that the Burbank action team, or the New York City action team, or the California, whatever it is, I'm part of this Kansas City action team, and we're an organized group, and we love animals, we love our community, and we want our elected officials to too. This is a great use of saying that it has a little oomph behind it. So don't be shy. This is why we wanted you to join. This is why we're on this call. So throw that little action team muscle around if you feel it.
And I'd like to add a little bit, if I could, as well. When I first got involved, the first thing that I did was had to do with getting a dog park in our community. And I actually saw there was a citizen who went to the city council meeting, and they spoke in front of the city council, and they said, we'd like a dog park in our community. And that's pretty much what they said. And then that was it. It didn't go anywhere. And so we ended up, and this is why I said what I did in my part of the presentation, we ended up putting some time into doing some research, because the legislators didn't know anything about dog parks. It's the same thing with some of the animal legislation that we're going to be asking them to pass. They may not know anything about it. And so we did a lot of that work for them, and we put it together in a document, an informational document, and we sat down with them. And again, like I said before, we put as much information as we could in there to give them every reason to say yes and no reason to say no, and tried to address any piece of opposition that we thought could come up about it. And we were very, very pleased to see that the elected officials, when we were able to answer all of their questions, they were like, okay, yeah, this sounds like something we could support. So I really think that, you know, just taking some time to do some research and do that work for them will really make you get things through the process.
Arlen, do you want to add anything as an elected official on how you appreciate when people approach you, or how somebody who's new to talking to their local elected officials might think about that?
Yeah, I think all of that was incredibly good advice. The only thing that I would really add is that it's important to stay positive. And I'm always amazed when someone comes in, they want the council to do something, or they want me to do something, and they come in angry, and they come in with a negative attitude, and they just assume opposition, you know, even though they don't know my position. And so I would just say, you know, you're there to educate, and the more positive you are, the better that interaction is going to be, and the more likely that policymaker is to be sympathetic to your point of view.
Great advice, Arlen. So Jim, are you still on? Do you want to add your, Jim has some great background that I think will be really good advice to our action team. He's another action team member. Jim, can I put you on the spot to share your wisdom?
Absolutely. It's not the first time I've been put on the spot, but Arlen, I'm going to mention, you're in Salt Lake City, I believe, and I'm doing this because I've got the sun beating in. So one thing I'll ask you to do is forgive me, I can't remember the name of the synagogue, but there's one Jewish synagogue in Salt Lake City. So if you have a chance to get near there, tell Rabbi Sam Spector you never call your name right. And then introduce yourself, because I think Sam would love to know about this organization, and in Salt Lake City would be a very good ally.
I have met Sam before, actually, but I'll be sure to introduce myself again.
Absolutely. Tell him you know me, and like I said, you don't call, you don't write.
I just really quickly, the only Jewish legislator we have in Utah is a woman named Patrice Arendt, and I was her legislative intern when I was in college, and we've had a lifelong friendship ever since. So she keeps me tied into that community pretty well.
That's great. I thought we had at least one Jewish Congress member too, but where I'm going to begin, folks, is this. And my meeting yesterday, I'm also on a committee at Temple Judea of Tarzana, which is a wonderful synagogue. And we're dealing with another issue that, a field that I've been working in for some time. I was part of the Office of the Inspector General at the Los Angeles Police Commission. The Rodney King beating completely changed my career, and I went to the Inspector General's office. I was involved in everything from Rampart through Margaret Mitchell, and what I'm bringing out is this. Can you hear me, by the way? Because I just noticed something pulled out. So
You're good, Jim. You're good.
We can hear you.
Then I'm going to take the earphones off. We were talking, of course, about the situation with the murder of George Floyd. And I bring it up here because when we make our approach to local officials or state or federal, timing is critical. And right now, the situation that we find ourselves in, I think, is key and forefront. So we clearly need to be sensitive to that. Now, having mentioned that, some thoughts, because I was a field deputy to a state legislator and 30 years with the city of Los Angeles. I mentioned, and also as a political scientist, I mentioned council committees. And the reason I bring that up is because that's really where the legislation gets done. That's really where you have the best markup. So I strongly encourage you to learn the different committees that impact the work that we're trying to do. And yes, I think that the best thing to do, because you're not always going to get the meeting with the legislator, is work the district offices. The district offices are open 5 days a week. And, you know, if you're not near City Hall or the County Hall of Administration, definitely work again in those council offices. If you want to see the member of Congress, I think working with the council deputies will help you, and then learn when they're in the district office, because they are in the district office. Obviously, they're traveling around the district, and that's the time to set up the meetings. So you're really dependent upon their schedule. There are other things. Obviously, I think we're going to look for allies. I'm going to mention a few groups that I'm involved in now that we might be able to pull in additional people and broaden our message. And some of you, at least here, might be interested in these groups as well. But I was part of a group called Leadership Southern California. And that was a group for potential leaders of the 21st century. And I was involved 20 years ago. But Leadership Southern California exam covers the 5-county area. And we were dealing with issues like transportation, immigration. We were in Orange County before it went bankrupt. It wasn't our fault. And other issues, but the 5 counties. And I bring that up because it's great training. It's now called Southern California Leadership Network, but it's great training, and you begin to develop networks with other organizations. So I strongly encourage that. I'm also part of the American Society for Public Administration. And, you know, we are public servants, we're volunteers by nature. So again, that's a potential for recruiting people. But I'll close and then I'll open to questions. My key point here is always, you know, look at the subcommittees, develop those relationships, if you will, with the district office, get those folks to know you, and that's kind of why I said, yeah, don't be kooky, bring cookies. And I'll close with one story. I was also for a long time in purchasing. So people found it funny that I went from purchasing, where I had to explain how to do business with the city of Los Angeles, to the Inspector General's office, where the best thing I could say, and you can hear me, I talk a lot. So imagine I'm in the Inspector General's office. The best I could say was no comment. People thought that it was funny. But when I was at purchasing, one of the strangest things I ever had at a vendor fair was someone who tried to sell us cemetery plots with the idea that city employees work together, they should be buried together. Now, for some people, that's a good idea. You know, I basically told her we're close, but not that close. But I will leave it there, and I'm open to any questions that you, the group has of me.
Thank you so much, Jim. And I want to note that Jim has great advice, and he was talking a little bit about connecting with federal offices, like your member of Congress, your member of Senate. Those offices, they have district offices. Those people can be, you know, you've got to follow Jim's advice and find the right time to connect with them. A lot of the types of issues we were talking about tonight, like budgets and all that, for animal services, those happen on the very local level, your city council, your county commission, and generally those folks tend to be even more accessible. So they're not splitting time between your city and Washington, DC. They are in the community all the time. You're going to run into them at the grocery store if you know who they are a lot of the time. So don't, again, I think the biggest thing to take away tonight is don't feel intimidated. Don't be shy about getting involved. One question we had, and Kenny, maybe you can answer that, and one of our friends can put it in the chat. Someone was looking for, if they want to join an action team, if they want to find an action team in their area, how do they do that?
Super simple. If you're already on the team, we had the map up there earlier, about 500 roles back up in the chat. Maybe someone can add it back in, but we have the map. That's how you can find a team. And if you just, or you can add yourself. So if you look and it'll say register a team. Once you do, you'll see if there's other people in your general area there. And if not, add yourself. There it is. The link just came up. Thank you, April.
April just put in the chat.
So you can find people there. If not, add yourself. I want to make it really clear. There's a ton of people in the map, which is amazing, but that's not representative of everybody on the action team. So if you haven't put yourself in, go put yourself in. The whole purpose of that is so advocates can find each other locally. So please go to our map, do that. And if you struggle with that, just email us at our action team email, which I'm sure someone's typing into the chat right now. And if you do that, we'll make sure we connect you with people in your area.
Thank you, Kenny. And I think we're getting close to time. I know some people are dropping off. Let's do one more question. I think we can combine a couple questions because there's been some really important things in the chat. One person was asking a question about COVID. Their city was funding a new shelter. COVID kind of put a wrench in that. It's on pause. I think that's a great opportunity to just go back to those elected officials, let them know you still care about it, let them know what you can do to build that community support for it. And then somebody else asked a really important question about a lot of the national conversation that's happening right now around Black Lives Matter and important issues of social justice. And what does that mean for our animal issues and the issues that some of us are on this call tonight? Do those have to be separate, or what is your advice, Kenny?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I'll try to be short-winded here, but I started my career as a community organizer around racial inequities, gang intervention in Boston, where I'm originally from. And it's been a part of my work for 20 years. Best Friends is in the process of forming a partnership with an organization called CARE, which whole focus is diversity and inclusion and animal welfare. We shared the link earlier, and I really recommend that everyone goes to their page and looks at it. But in a nutshell, this effort we're talking about, they're not separate at all. The goal of kind of building more humane, more fair, more equitable, and kind communities is not exclusive to cats and dogs. People that care about cats and dogs tend to care about the people too, the environment. They tend to care about their general world around them holistically. And these are issues that are incredibly important to us. Me, my team, Elise, April, Jeff, all my colleagues, Elizabeth, Arlen, and Sandy. I know these are all issues that are really important to us. We also recognize that on this call, it's a bit of a monolith and our industry tends to be a bit white, to be frank. We are actively working on changing that. What I would encourage everyone on the call now is to reach out. What is your sphere of influence? Where are your friends? Where are your colleagues, your family members? Bring in people that kind of are more diverse to this. Bring people to the action team. Bring them to these calls. We have hundreds of people on the action team who from places down in Texas, a huge Latino population, African American, but it's not nearly enough. So I'll stop there because I don't want to keep us all on until 9 o'clock tonight. But it's a really important issue, and to be frank, it's something we're not doing a good enough job of. We're not, and it's something we need to get better at. We're committed to getting better at it, but that's where we need your help, right? Invite people, like find people from diverse and different communities, socioeconomics, race, gender, everything. We want this to be inclusive, and the only way we do that is we need you to bring more people to the party. So it's something we're working on. It's something we're trying to improve and also recognize that we haven't done a good job of up to now, but we need to all do better. So we're working on it.
Kenny, you want to close us out and see who among us is gonna, where they are and where they're getting pumped up on budgets and where they're gonna make sure the animals are protected in their local community? I will leave it to you.
Yeah, so we appreciate you guys. We went a little bit long tonight, but it was worth it. I'm feeling inspired and motivated. So if you want, you already put it, but put into the chat what city you're from, and I want to issue a challenge. We always end these calls with the challenge because talk is great, but action is better, right? So what we want to encourage you all to do is tonight, tomorrow, before this week is out, find your local elected officials, your city commissioners, your mayors, your legislators, call them. Get on the phone and say, hey, my name is Sue. I live in New York. I love my community. I love animals. I vote. I'm on the action team. We want you to take a stand and stand up for dogs and cats. Send them an email. If you're not sure how to do that, email us. We'll write the email out for you, and you can copy and paste it. Call them. This is how we change things. If you're pissed off and you don't want to see dogs and cats die, if you're pissed off because you want your community to be better for people and pets. Our tagline, you can't see my shirt, but our tagline is pets, people, community. So get on the phone and say, hey, our community can do better. Our politicians need to do better. We want to challenge you today, wherever you live. If you're in Arizona, if you're in New York, if you're out in LA.
We got Endicott, New York, Kenny. Ellen from Endicott. She's looking for friends.
Yeah, get out there. Find other people. Call your friends and say, hey, I'm calling my legislator.
Oh, Heather, she's from Rochester. We got 2 upstate New York people. Look at that.
I love it. New York. Lindsay
call.
is in New York. We talked to her last week. We obviously, Jim's not shy. Do what you got to do. Bring cookies. Send a stuffed animal. Do what you got to do.
Start dating.
Change the world. Right, Jim? You tell. This is the way we make the world kinder to animals and to people. Use your power. Use your collective forces, people. If we sit on the sideline, cats and dogs die, people suffer, communities suffer. So we want to encourage you and challenge you. Make those calls, make those emails. We'll sign off with that. Stay safe, stay healthy, get active, get involved. We love you. We appreciate you joining. Email us if you have questions. Jim, thanks so much.
Thanks to our speakers. We really appreciate Elizabeth, Arlen, Sandy. We're awesome. We're so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank all of you. Bye.